Alright, so before we continue, I think now it would be pertinent to talk a bit about the starters. I'll be ranking them from worst to best, as in hardest to use to easiest to use. I'm going to rank each starter based on their performance mainly in the main game's story. You cannot evolve them until the after game, and you can recruit the other starters later on, so I'm not focusing much on their utility after the main story is over. Psyduck is here, for some reason. Its main problem is that it won't be learning any stab moves for, most likely, the entirety of the main game. Did you assume it learns Water Gun, or maybe at least Bubble through level up? Think again! Its main special attack is Confusion, which is okay, but you won't get stabbed from it. It learns Disable, which is actually nice since it paralyzes opponents in Mystery Dungeon, but you have other options if you really want to paralyze. As a defensive type, Water doesn't even particularly match up well with any major boss fight. There's an electric type you'll be weak to, and there's only 2 bosses with stabs that you resist as a Psyduck. The only advantage I could think of is that since it's a water type, you can go through water if you're so inclined. But even then, you have other options for that. Oh, and did you expect to give it a water type move via TM? Nope, you're not finding Surf or Water Pulse until the after game. Next up, we have Eevee. Eevee's a pretty popular starter, but there's really not much to talk about with it. Its learn set is pretty barren for the main game, and you're really going to want to give it some TM moves to better support it. Of course, in the aftergame, when you can evolve it, you'll have a much better Pokemon, and you can obtain your evolution of choice if you're willing to find the item it needs. But that's all I can really give it. The good news is that Facade is a pretty common TM to run into. Its base 70 powers can actually take you pretty far early game since you get stabbed from it, and since it doubles in power if you can find a way to get a status effect onto your opponent, that's the main TM I'd recommend for it. Meowth! Not much better than Eevee. Payday is a good stab move for it, and at least its base moves will also give it stab. Unlike Eevee, you'll probably be dropping it in the aftergame whenever you can, though. Persian isn't honestly that great. And for the main game, it's got decent moves. Much like Eevee, you'll want to give it Frustration or some other normal type move to make good use of it. And as mentioned earlier, Facade, it can use that decently well. Next up is Skitty, another oddball inclusion in Mystery Dungeon. Its reputation isn't that great in the main series, but compared to the other normal types, it's actually better than you'd expect. Skitty gets a good level up move pool. The main draw is Attract. In Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team only, Infatuation will affect any and every Pokemon regardless of gender. Its cute charm ability is thusly quite a boon. Unfortunately, Delcatty isn't a very good Pokemon, and you'd have to find a Moonstone to evolve it. You'll probably drop it in the aftergame, but for the main game, she gives you quite a few tools to work with. Next up, Cubone and Machop. I rank these both sorta similar. They're decent physical Pokemon, with Machop being a good physical attacker and Cubone being a good physical defender. Wait, can you use defender in that context? I mean, if it'd make a good defense lore, it'd still be accurate, but blah, rambling. They both learn Stab Move, Bone Club, and Karate Chop respectively, and work pretty well in my opinion. There's only one thing that it keeps each from a higher rank. For Cubone, it's that the Thick Club is not available in this game. For Machop, the main problem is that there are quite a few flying types in this game it has to worry about. Coincidentally, most of the main game's bosses are flying type. In fact, there's only a handful of bosses in general that it doesn't have a weakness to. Long story short, Machop is great for dungeons, not so great for bosses. You might think that the bosses wouldn't be that bad when they take up so little game time, but if you're thinking that, you've clearly not had to soft reset at 3 particular mid-game bosses 10 times each like I had to. One step above that, we'll have Pikachu. Unlike Machop, since there are quite a few flying types, Electric is a fairly good type for most of the game. To be fair, you can recruit other electric types, including a mandatory one that gets handed over to you, but they aren't allowed to help you against certain problematic boss fights that Pikachu helps with. It also gets Thunder Wave through level up. Its stats aren't quite as good as most of the other starters, but still, I'd rate it quite highly. Alright, now let's get on to the main series starters. Let's start with Chikorita. It has a reputation for not being that good, but it gets a long-range attack in Razor Leaf, and if you find a TM for Bullet Seed, you've got a multi-hitting move, which in this game, they actually forgot to power down each hit, which makes it unintentionally overpowered. And both Synthesis and Reflect are quite useful moves, even when you consider Grass isn't always the best defensive type for the game. Next up is Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur is one of the better starters early game. It gets Poison Powder and Sleep Powder. Keep in mind that in this game, you can have all status ailments at once. Unfortunately, it's not like stalling really works well in a dungeon crawler, and late game its performance isn't all that remarkable, so I'd have to rank it below our next entrant, Treecko! It actually stands out decently by getting agility late game. Keep in mind that in Mystery Dungeon, this gives your whole party extra turns. That alone is immensely helpful. Unfortunately, grass doesn't match up well with, any major dungeon or boss until the aftergame. If you're expecting it to be good against water types, you actually won't be coming across many. That's bad news for the grass types, but good news for our fire types. Charmander and Cyndaquil are fairly similar. Both fire types, both get fire type moves. What differentiates them from Torchic is their access to Smokescreen by level up. Personally, I don't find it that useful, but it's an option. It gives any opponent the Whiffer status, which makes them miss more often. Which, that could be situationally okay. I rank Torchic slightly above the other two. Its main benefit is Mirror Move. As anyone who's gone through Dark Crater will remember, when Mirror Move is used, for 2 turns, any move that is used on it will be reflected back at the attacker, not affecting you whatsoever. That is OP, although this doesn't apply to standard A attacks, and you'll learn it somewhat late, but still! Last up we have our water types. I say they're the most useful type because you'll often come across pools of water that only water types can cross. Well, water types, flying types, and Pokemon that levitate. But hey, that's not any of the other starters. And Water isn't that bad of a type when you get to use it both defensively and offensively, unlike poor Psyduck. Like with the fire types, Totodile and Squirtle are fairly similar for the purposes of the main game. I'll rank Squirtle and Totodile the same, but I give Mudkip a slight edge because I prefer its move pool a bit. As you can see, its moves are a bit more diverse, and in the aftergame, if you evolve it, you'll get yourself an easy Earthquake user. One thing that might hold you back from picking some of our choices is that some starters are harder to evolve than others. Pikachu needs a Thunderscone, City needs a Moonstone, and Eevee needs items for each of its evolutions. Unless you are going to use Wonder Mail codes to get their items quickly, you'll have to wait to evolve them. If it evolves by level up, in contrast, you'll have access to their evolutions almost immediately once the aftergame opens up. The last thing I have to say is that if you want to control your choice of starter, you'll have a hell of a time doing it. As you see, it's determined by the answers you give to the personality quiz, but keep in mind that you only get a fraction of the possible questions it can throw at you on any given run, and it's possible to get a configuration that makes certain starters unobtainable, and you might have to soft reset frequently. What you'll need to do is find a guide which tells you how many points each answer gives you to the personality type of your starter of choice, like the one I'll link in the description, making sure the gender you pick coincides with the starter you want, since each personality type will have 2 different Pokemon for each gender. Yeah, it's annoying. This process returns in the sequel, but thankfully in Gates to Infinity and Super Mystery Dungeon, this process is made much simpler. We'll discuss that situation when we get to it, but for now, that's all the editorializing I have to do. Let's get back to the Let's Play.